Hello, I'm Welton Gaddy from State of Belief Radio, president of Interfaith Alliance, speaking to you from outside Charlotte, North Carolina right now, where we are attending the Democratic National Convention. Now, I should tell you that the reason we are at the Democratic National Convention and we're not at the Republican National Convention is because the Democrats gave us credentials. The Republicans didn't. We are not a partisan-oriented program, as you know, because State of Belief is a program aimed at covering both parties and doing so in a civil way. But I also have with me, as you can see, someone who is a regular contributor to State of Belief Radio, Greg Lebel, who knows politics inside out, not just from teaching them, but also from being a campaign manager in a presidential campaign. Greg, welcome.
It's nice to be back, Welton.
We didn't have a chance to sit and talk during the Republican National Convention, and before we do anything on the Democratic Convention, I'd like for us to kind of look back over our shoulders. And, you know, the first question that comes to mind may be one that you should be asking me instead of me asking you. But do you think if Pat Robertson is still advising God, that he actually sent a hurricane to the Republicans and just gave the Democrats a little rain?
I raised that question several times during the Republican convention. Actually, it is an interesting one. It seems that when bad weather hits liberal areas or Democratic events, it's the hand of God. When it's a Republican event, it's just bad weather.
I see. Okay. Well, that helps me and saves me having to do any theological explanation. What'd you think of the Republican convention?
I thought that structurally it went pretty well. I think they put it together well. They knew what they had to do. It was clear what it was that they wanted to accomplish. To a large extent, they did that. I think there were a couple of screw-ups along the way. Certainly, the weather was a factor. I think watching a split, Americans watching a split screen, watching the Republican convention, and Anderson Cooper standing out in the rain simultaneously was something that they would rather not have had. But aside from that, I think there were a few slip-ups on their part. But generally, I thought they knew what they wanted to do, and to a large extent, I think they probably did it.
Name me a slip-up.
Well, we can start with Chris Christie. I think that was a slip-up. Governor Christie, his keynote was, I think, too much about Chris Christie, and not nearly enough about their nominee, about Governor Romney. So I think that was I think that was one of the slip-ups that they had to deal with.
Did he know what he was doing, though? I mean, because I had the sense that he was addressing the nation, not the Republican National Convention, and he said "I" far more than he referred to the nominees of the party, and I can't imagine that was an accident.
No, it wasn't an accident. I can't imagine that it was an accident. And you know, anyone who's standing at the podium, particularly during prime time in any of these conventions, is speaking to the nation and not to the room. The room is simply a backdrop from which they speak. I think that Governor Christie was speaking to 2016. I think he sees himself as a potential presidential candidate 2016, or if things go according to their plan, 2020. But I do think that that was at least a little bit on his mind as he was speaking.
Greg, it was noticeable to me, and some other people I've mentioned this to were not as impressed by it as I was, but the religious perspective was primarily given not by the candidates, but by people who knew the candidates, and particularly with Governor Romney. I found that to be a little disturbing for me. In other words, if I had people, if I were running for president and I had people speaking for me, I would want them to be telling the nation how good a president I would be. They were saying how good a Mormon he was, as if that had something to do with the presidency. And then he said very little about it himself. And I wrote in Huffington Post, and as you would not be surprised, some people disagreed with it, particularly Republicans, that it was almost like that was scripted, obviously, and it was almost like the Republican Party was saying, by the way, we're still a very religious group of people, even though we nominated Governor Romney. And I would have thought he would have wanted to say, I'm proud of my faith, and it's part of my faith is doing politics.
I think there are a couple of interesting challenges that Romney and the party face. Romney is clearly not comfortable in talking about himself in personal terms. And I think that bringing these folks up to sort of tell those stories was a way of dealing with that. I think that also what was going on is there continues to be, for the Romney campaign, this challenge with conservative Christians. And this sort of helped, I think, to deal, or at least the intent was for it to help to deal with that, to bring folks up who would talk about what Romney did in the name of his faith to them as individuals and in their communities. So I think it was very definitely intended to be a part of that process to deal with these issues. The Mormon faith continues to be a significant issue. So all of that was kind of wrapped into these sort of testimonials. And we saw the same thing. Ann Romney sort of did the same thing. In some ways, I would say not nearly as effectively as some of the other folks who did it. But it was all about sort of reintroducing Mitt Romney the person, or maybe I should not say reintroducing, introducing Mitt Romney the person to the nation, and this was one of the ways they decided to do it. And they do need to quell some of that lingering concern among conservative Christians about his Mormonism.
Did you come away from last week learning anything, knowing anything about the Republican campaign that you didn't know before last week started?
No, I saw what I think Romney and we all have known he's had to do from the beginning, which is to humanize himself, make himself a more appealing character. The polls show this. President Obama is vastly more popular, is seen as being much more connected to middle class voters. Romney is simply in a deficit in that area, and they understand the power of that in the mindset of American voters when they're voting.
Greg, one thing that did happen that probably we ought to address is that Senator Rubio, in his remarks to the convention, brought up this whole American exceptionalism matter. He talked about the fact that the "In God We Trust" on our coin points to the major value in the United States. I don't know what exactly that means for people who hold no religion or a religion different from his. But anyway, he brought it up. He said we are an exceptional people. What do you think about that?
Well, I think this relates. This is a classic example of the use of buzzwords in those speeches, and I think you're right when you define this as referring to that concept of American exceptionalism. Because as you know, there was a brouhaha not too long ago about whether President Obama actually believes in American exceptionalism, and so I think part of it was to remind the viewers of that this president may not think we're as great as we think we are, while at the same time bringing up the motto "In God We Trust." Once again, sort of touches the nerve of that conservative Christian group. So it sort of did two things at the same time, and again, all seeming to me to continue to reach out to the base. We know that this is not an election where there are a lot of persuadable voters left. So, and I think we will see this week as well, in very different forms. But this was another attempt to get out there and just fire up the base.
Well, now the gavel has not yet fallen for the first time to convene the Democratic National Convention. That's what we're here to do, is to observe, listen, and then talk about it at every day. What's going to happen? Let me tell you one of the things I'm interested in seeing. I'm interested in seeing how President Obama handles his approach to religion, because in recent days he has become, at least in vocabulary, much more conservative in talking about his Christianity, as if he has to stress that to counter the charges that continue to be made about him being a Muslim. So what is it? What are you looking for this week?
The primary thing I'm looking for is seeing whether the Democrats avoid some of the pitfalls that the Republicans fell into, which tended to be, and I think the classic example was Paul Ryan's acceptance speech, is overstating the facts, getting too much into hyperbole. I think that there is a resurgence of interest in the sort of fact checker sort of mindset among all Americans, and certainly among the people who sort of do that for a living. So I think that the president and all the speakers have to be careful not to overpromise, overstate. I think your instinct is right about President Obama and the faith question. He always needs to address. He doesn't need to address it to the extent that the governor of Romney does, but I think that has to be sort of there will be that sort of underlying theme. The other thing they have to be careful of is not to try to and I don't think they'll do this. If they do, they're in big trouble. They have to be careful not to try to respond to the Republican rhetoric. Mm-hmm. They have their own rhetoric. Their rhetoric can, as a secondary or sort of tertiary consequence, answer some of those charges, but they have to be careful they don't do that directly.
Well, to be a little bit biblical, I am neither a prophet nor a son of a prophet, but I would be fairly safe, I think, in predicting that there will not be an incident with an empty chair at the Democratic National Convention. But, who knows? We'll see. We're going to be talking with you all week, and maybe if we're wrong, you can tell us we're wrong, but we'll see. We're going to bring you the best commentary we can bring you about what's going on with religion at the Democratic National Convention. This is Greg Lebel, Welton Gaddy, State of Belief.